Chosen one, stop chasing the provision and start chasing the assignment. Heaven does not fund personal ambition, it funds divine obedience. If you are in alignment, the resources required for your task will find you without manipulation or striving. Peace, not panic, is the currency of the kingdom. And I know that might sound uncomfortable at first, because everything around you has taught you the opposite. You were taught to secure, to control, to plan every step so nothing falls apart. You were told that if you don't chase money, you'll fall behind. That if you're not constantly pushing, you'll be left without. So naturally, when things feel unstable financially, your first instinct is to run faster, to try harder, to force something to work. But what if that pressure you feel isn't actually about money? What if it's about misalignment? Because there's a difference between building something out of fear and stepping into something you were actually called to do. And in that difference, everything changes. Provision doesn't respond to panic. It responds to position. And maybe right now, your life isn't asking you to chase more. It's asking you to realign. Let's be honest about something most people don't say out loud. Financial stress doesn't just affect your bank account, it affects your sense of control. It makes you question your decisions, your direction, even your worth. You can be doing everything right on paper, working hard, staying disciplined, trying to be responsible, and still feel like nothing is really moving. And that's the part that confuses you, because effort is there, intention is there. You're not being lazy. You're not avoiding responsibility. If anything, you might be overextending yourself, trying to hold everything together. But the results don't match the effort. And over time, that creates frustration, then doubt, then a quiet kind of exhaustion that's hard to explain to anyone else. This is where most people default to one conclusion. I just need to do more. So they push harder, take on more work, say yes to things they don't even feel connected to, stretch themselves thinner, hoping that somewhere in all that effort, something will finally click. But what if the issue isn't effort? What if it's direction? Because there's a difference between working hard and working in alignment. When you're operating outside of your assignment, outside of what you're actually meant to build, contribute, or carry, things can still move, but they feel forced. Opportunities don't flow, they have to be chased. Money comes, but it doesn't stay. Progress happens, but it's inconsistent. It feels like you're constantly trying to stabilize something that won't fully settle. Not because you're incapable, but because you're out of position. And when you're out of position, provision doesn't flow naturally. Not because it's being withheld from you, but because it's not meant to sustain that version of your path. That's a difficult idea to accept, because it challenges everything you've been taught about control. It suggests that more effort isn't always the answer, that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is pause and ask a different question. Not, how can I earn more? But, am I aligned with what I'm supposed to be doing right now? Because provision in its truest form isn't just about income. It's about support. It's about having what you need, when you need it, to carry out what you've been called to do. And if that call is unclear, or ignored, or replaced with something that feels safer or more socially accepted, then everything starts to feel unstable, no matter how hard you try. So maybe the pressure you feel around money isn't a sign that you need to push harder. Maybe it's a signal, a redirection, a quiet invitation to stop chasing outcomes and start paying attention to alignment. There's a principle that most people never fully understand, even if they've heard it before. Provision follows purpose. Not pressure, not panic, not endless striving. Purpose. And the reason this is so easy to misunderstand is because the world trains you to reverse it. You're taught to secure resources first, then figure out what to do with them. To build stability, then search for meaning. To chase money, then eventually, if you have time, align your life with something deeper. But that order creates tension, because when money becomes the starting point, everything else becomes conditional. You begin to filter your decisions based on what feels safe, what seems profitable, what guarantees a return. And slowly, without realizing it, you drift further away from what you were actually meant to do. Not in an obvious way. In a subtle, socially acceptable way. You still look productive. You still look responsible. But internally, something feels off. Because the work may be sustainable financially, but it's not aligned spiritually or mentally. And that misalignment has a cost. It drains your energy faster. It creates resistance in small, consistent ways. It makes everything feel heavier than it should be. You find yourself needing more motivation just to maintain what you've built. That's what pressure does. It forces movement, but it doesn't create flow. Purpose, on the other hand, works differently. When you're aligned with what you're meant to do, even if it's not fully clear yet, there's a different kind of energy present. It doesn't mean everything is easy. It doesn't mean there are no challenges. But there's a sense that your effort is connected to something real, something that holds. And in that space, provision begins to respond differently. Not always instantly, not always in the way you expect, but consistently enough that you start to notice a pattern. The right connection appears at the right time. The opportunity shows up just as you're ready to step into it. The resource you need becomes available when it's actually required, not months before, not years after. And this is where trust becomes important. Because if you're used to controlling everything, this kind of flow can feel unstable at first. You might question it. You might try to force it into a more predictable structure. You might even step out of alignment temporarily just to feel secure again. But every time you do that, you'll feel the difference. Because striving creates noise, and noise makes it harder to hear direction. When you're constantly chasing, constantly calculating, constantly trying to secure outcomes, your attention is fragmented. You're focused on results, not alignment. And in that state, even if opportunities come, you may not recognize which ones actually belong to you. That's why this phase, this season of realignment, is so important. It's not just about slowing down your actions. It's about refining your awareness. Learning to move from a place of clarity instead of urgency. Learning to say yes to what feels right, even if it doesn't immediately make sense financially. Learning to trust that provision is not something you have to force, but something that responds to obedience. Because money, in this context, is not the goal. It's a tool, a response, a form of support that follows the work you were actually designed to do. And once you truly understand that, the pressure begins to lift. Not because you stop caring about provision, but because you stop trying to control it. At the center of everything you're experiencing right now is identity, not your skills, not your current income, not your external circumstances. Identity, because how you see yourself will always determine how you pursue, receive, and manage provision. If you see yourself as the sole provider of your life, then everything becomes your responsibility in the most absolute sense. Every opportunity has to be created by you. Every financial outcome has to be secured by you. Every gap has to be filled by your effort, your planning, your control. And at first, that might feel empowering. But over time, it becomes exhausting. Because it creates a life where nothing can truly rest. You're always calculating, always anticipating, always trying to stay ahead of what might go wrong. Even when things are stable, there's a quiet anxiety underneath it all, because you know how quickly things can change. So you keep pushing. Not always because you want to, but because you feel like you have to. That's the identity most people operate from. But it's also the identity that keeps you trapped in pressure. Now consider a different perspective. What if you are not the source, but the steward? Not the origin of provision, but the one entrusted with it. That shift might seem subtle, but it changes everything about how you move. Because a steward doesn't chase resources out of fear. A steward aligns with responsibility. A steward understands that provision is connected to purpose, not ego. It's not about accumulating more just to feel secure. It's about managing what is given in a way that serves something meaningful. And this is where things begin to get real. Because many people say they want more provision, but they haven't stepped into the identity that can carry it correctly. They want expansion without structure, increase without discipline, visibility without clarity. And if that kind of provision were given too early, it wouldn't create stability. It would create distortion. It would amplify whatever is already unstable internally. So instead of immediately increasing your resources, this phase focuses on something deeper. Capacity. Your ability to hold more without losing alignment. Your ability to receive without becoming distracted. Your ability to manage without becoming attached. And that kind of capacity cannot be rushed. It has to be built slowly, intentionally, often in environments where you don't have excess, where you have just enough to function, just enough to learn, just enough to become aware of how you think and how you decide. Because it's in those moments that your patterns are revealed. How you respond when things feel limited. How you think when there's uncertainty. How you act when there's no external pressure forcing you to perform. This is where character is formed. Not in abundance, but in restraint. Not when everything is flowing easily, but when you have to be intentional with what you have. And as this process unfolds, something begins to change inside you. You stop measuring your life purely based on how much you have. You start paying attention to how well you handle what's already in your hands. You become more disciplined, not in a rigid, restrictive way, but in a clear, focused way. You make decisions with awareness. You stop saying yes to things that don't align, even if they seem profitable. You become more selective, not because you're trying to limit yourself, but because you understand that misalignment always comes with a hidden cost. And that shift builds trust. Not external trust from people. Internal trust. The kind that stabilizes you. Because once you trust how you move, you no longer feel the need to chase everything that looks like an opportunity. You don't panic when things are quiet. You don't overreact when things change. You remain steady. And that steadiness is what allows provision to increase without destabilizing you. Because now, you're not just someone who wants more. You're someone who can carry more. And that's the key. Provision is not just about access. It's about alignment and capacity meeting at the same time. If alignment is there but capacity is not, things become overwhelming. If capacity is there but alignment is not, things become misused. But when both are present, provision flows in a way that actually supports your life instead of complicating it. So if it feels like things have been limited, slowed down, or carefully measured in your life, don't assume it's lack. It may be calibration. You are being shaped into someone who can receive without losing direction, who can hold resources without being controlled by them, who can move forward without being driven by fear. And once that identity is fully formed, provision will no longer feel like something you have to chase. It will feel like something that meets you exactly where you are aligned. So let's slow this down and make it real. How does provision actually work in your daily life? Not as an idea, not as something distant, but as something you can recognize, something you can participate in. Because this isn't random. There is a pattern, and it begins with something very simple: obedience. Not the kind of obedience people often imagine, something dramatic, overwhelming, or life-altering overnight, but the quiet kind. The small, consistent decisions that don't look impressive from the outside, but carry weight internally. It's the moment you feel a clear direction, and you don't ignore it. It's the nudge to start something you've been postponing. The decision to walk away from something that no longer aligns, even if it feels risky. The discipline to follow through on something that doesn't give immediate results. These moments don't look significant on their own, but they build alignment. Because alignment is not a single decision, it's a pattern of agreement. Every time you say yes to what you know is right, even when it's inconvenient or unclear, you adjust your position slightly. And over time, those small adjustments create a path that is actually yours, not something inherited, not something copied, but something aligned. And once alignment begins to stabilize, provision responds. Not always in dramatic ways. Sometimes it's subtle. An idea becomes clearer. A connection appears naturally. An opportunity opens that fits, not just financially, but structurally, emotionally, mentally. And the key difference is this: you're no longer forcing it. You're recognizing it. Because when you're out of alignment, everything feels like it has to be chased. You question every step. You overthink every decision. You try to secure outcomes before you even understand the direction. But when you're aligned, there's a different rhythm. You take one step, and the next piece meets you there. Not everything at once, but enough. And that leads to one of the most important principles in this entire process. Provision is timed. It doesn't come early, and it's never truly late. It arrives at the point where it can be used correctly, which means if something hasn't shown up yet, it's not always about denial. It's often about readiness. There may still be something in your thinking, your habits, or your identity that needs to stabilize before that level of provision can actually support you instead of distracting you. Because receiving too early can create just as many problems as receiving too late. So instead of rushing the outcome, the focus shifts to preparation. Becoming someone who can recognize, receive, and manage what comes without losing alignment. And this is where most people struggle. Because when things feel uncertain, the natural reaction is panic. To move faster, to grab whatever is available, to create a sense of control, even if it leads to long-term misalignment. But there's another indicator you can begin to trust. Peace. Not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of internal chaos. Because when you are aligned, even if things are not fully clear yet, there is a steadiness underneath your decisions. You're not rushing. You're not forcing. You're moving, but you're grounded. And that state matters more than external outcomes. Because peace keeps your perception sharp. It allows you to see what actually belongs in your life, and what only looks appealing because of urgency or fear. It helps you say no without hesitation, and yes without overthinking. It keeps you anchored in your assignment. And when you stay in that position long enough, provision no longer feels like something unpredictable. It becomes responsive. You take the step in front of you, and what you need meets you there. Not in excess, not all at once, but in precision. Exactly what's required for that moment, so you can continue moving forward without confusion. And over time, that builds something deeper than financial stability. It builds trust, not in outcomes, but in the process itself. Most people think provision begins the moment money appears, but that's actually the final stage, not the first. Provision starts much earlier, quietly, internally, long before anything shows up in your external reality. And if you don't recognize these early signs, you might miss the fact that things are already moving in your favor. The first sign is emotional. You begin to feel less urgency. Not because everything is resolved, not because your financial situation has suddenly stabilized, but because your internal response has changed. The panic that used to push you into rushed decisions starts to fade. You're no longer operating from fear. You're no longer trying to fix everything at once. Instead, there's space. And in that space, clarity begins to form. You think more clearly. You respond instead of react. You don't feel the same pressure to control every outcome. And even though nothing dramatic has changed externally, something important has shifted internally. The second sign shows up in your behavior. You become more selective. You stop chasing every opportunity just because it offers money. You stop saying yes out of fear of missing out. Instead, you begin to evaluate things differently. You ask yourself, does this actually align with where I'm going? Or is this just something that temporarily relieves pressure but pulls me off track? And that question changes everything. Because now you're not just accepting provision, you're discerning it. The third sign is subtle, but undeniable once you notice it. Things begin to align naturally. Not all at once, not in overwhelming ways, but in precise, timely moments. A conversation leads somewhere meaningful. An idea connects with the right person. An opportunity appears that fits your current level instead of forcing you into something you're not ready to sustain. And the key detail is this. You didn't force it. You didn't chase it. You didn't manipulate the outcome. It met you where you were aligned. And finally, there's the deepest sign of all. A quiet sense of certainty. Not loud confidence, not complete clarity about the future, but a grounded feeling that you are on the right path. Even if your finances are still developing, even if things are not fully visible yet, the anxiety no longer controls you the same way. Because you're no longer relying only on what you can see. You're starting to trust what you can feel. And that's how you know provision is already in motion. At the end of all this, it becomes simple. Not easy, but clear. You were never meant to chase provision as the goal. You were meant to align with the assignment and let provision respond to that alignment. Because money, resources, opportunities, they are not the source. They are support. And when you reverse that order, when you chase support instead of purpose, you create pressure that was never meant to exist. But when you realign, something shifts. You stop asking, how do I secure everything? And you start asking, what is being asked of me today? That question brings you back into the present, into the only place where alignment can actually happen. Because it's not built in one big decision, it's built in daily obedience. Small, consistent yes moments that don't always look significant, but quietly position you exactly where you need to be. And over time, those moments compound. They create clarity. They create stability. They create flow. So if you've been feeling pressure around finances, uncertainty about your future, or the urge to control everything at once, pause. You don't need to chase harder. You need to listen closer. Focus on the yes in front of you today, and let provision meet you there.